7 shocking psychological facts seen through the eyes of Stoicism. There's a type of pain that doesn't scream. It doesn't break glasses, doesn't slam doors, doesn't appear in diagnosis, but it's there, in the way someone hesitates before answering a simple question, in the gaze that deflects when receiving a compliment, in the difficulty of accepting silence without trying to fill it with any distraction. This silent pain molds choice, carves fear, drives habit. It's what makes us say yes when we wanted to say no, and smile when everything inside us begs for rest. These aren't visible wounds. They're internal folds of the soul, small emotional fractures that accumulate until one day, without warning, the body starts reacting on its own. Seneca said that the mind is the battlefield between judgment and truth. But most of us live as if this battle has already been lost without even knowing it existed. Our thoughts are not chosen. They were inherited, modeled, imposed. They are third-party opinions that became our inner voice. They are conclusions formed amidst fear, abandonment, the insatiable desire to be accepted. We carry beliefs like carrying an old suitcase full of emotional junk, too heavy to put down, but too useless to keep carrying. And so, we go on, but we go on tired, going on but empty, seeking a relief we can't name. Epictetus said, "It's not what happens to us that disturbs us, but what we think about what happens to us." And that changes everything, because it's not the end of a relationship that destroys someone, but what that loss makes echo inside. It's not the criticism that hurts, but the silent interpretation that I'm not good enough. It's not silence that isolates us, but the story we tell ourselves about what that silence means. Pain, then, is not an enemy. It's a reflection, a mirror that insists on showing what we try not to see. The soul, Seneca said, is like a ship in a storm, but it's not the sea that makes it sink. It's the sailor without direction. And perhaps that's what frightens us most, realizing that we are often that sailor, lost, confused, trying to appear strong while floating amidst emotions we can't name. Most people avoid looking inward, not because it's dark in there, but because the truth resides within us. And truth, when it's profound, hurts. It hurts, but it also heals. It frightens, but it also liberates. This is the invitation of this text, not to flee, but to look, to listen to what has been trying to be heard for so long. If you've ever caught yourself asking, why do I feel this way? Why do I repeat patterns that hurt me? Why can't I just be at peace? Know this discomfort can be the beginning of a return to yourself, a return to direction, a return to the silent dignity of one who decides, even with fear, to face their own soul as it is. Wounded, yes, but still whole. Hurt, yes, but still alive. And it is from this point, this place of disconcerting silence, that we will begin the invisible mistake of trying to please to be loved. We don't always realize the exact moment we start disappearing inside. It happens gradually, like a breeze turning into a gale, and suddenly, we no longer know what is ours and what is others' projection. The desire to please begins by seeming like generosity. We want people to like us, to stay, to choose us, but without realizing it, we mold our words, our gestures, our boundaries, everything, to fit into a space where there was never real acceptance. And the more we fit in, the more we lose ourselves. Because affection that depends on performance is a prison disguised as care, and no one breathes with dignity where they cannot truly be themselves. There's a sadness born from this constant effort not to disappoint. It doesn't express itself in visible tears, but in internal absence, in unspoken question, in swallowed desires, in accepted invitations without willingness, just to maintain a connection that no longer sustains one's own essence. The need to be loved transforms into dependence into silence, and silence into a kind of self-abandonment. We get used to having no voice as long as we still have company. But the price of this is high, because there comes a time when even company doesn't compensate for the emptiness of no longer recognizing oneself in one's own reflection. Seneca, with his uncomfortable clarity, said, "We cannot be free if we depend on others' applause." And this is one of the hardest and most liberating truths anyone can hear, because as long as our identity is tied to the other's gaze, we will live in constant vigilance, in constant tension, afraid of losing the affection that makes us feel secure. But this security is false. It's like building a house on sand, beautiful on the outside, fragile on the inside. Every time we mold ourselves to avoid rejection, we are rejecting ourselves first. And that hurts more than any external no. There's something profoundly courageous in saying, this is me. And even if you don't stay, I will. Staying with yourself is the first step to any true bond, because only those who embrace themselves can truly be embraced. Only those who see themselves with compassion can choose relationships that don't demand performance but offer present. And perhaps freedom begins exactly here, in that silent point where we decide to stop begging for love and begin to rebuild calmly our emotional dignity. For today, write on a piece of paper, without rush, without filter, 3 things you do just to be accepted. That's all. Write them down. Look at them and ask yourself, what of this truly belongs to me? Sometimes self-love begins with a no that protects, a no that liberates, a no that finally brings us back inward when the mind races and the body screams and nobody understands. There are days when the body is present, but the soul seems elsewhere. The face tries hard to maintain a neutral expression, but inside, there's a constant noise, as if something is about to collapse. It's a tiredness that sleep doesn't resolve, a nameless restlessness that weighs on the chest. The mind races, as if trying to escape something invisible, and the body screams, but nobody listens, because there's no fever, no wound, no apparent sign. Just an accelerated heart, short breath, the feeling of being surrounded by a world that demands calm, while everything inside fragments in silence. This is the internal war many face every day without witness, and perhaps what hurts most is precisely the absence of understanding. The social mask continues to function. Commitments are met. Good humor is rehearsed. But inside, the soul is entrenched, fighting, trying not to sink, trying to maintain lucidity while everything seems out of sync. Anxiety is not just fear of the future. It's an excess of undigested thought. It's the overload of emotions that find no outlet. It's living in today's body, but with the mind trapped in 1,000 possibilities that haven't even happened yet. It's a tension that accumulates in the shoulders, in the hand, in the stomach, as if the body itself no longer knows where to rest. Seneca wrote that time well used is refuge, but time poorly lived is punishment. And perhaps this is the root of modern emotional exhaustion, not knowing where or when to find true refuge. We live busy but not present, filled with tasks but empty of meaning. And when we finally have a moment of silence, we don't know what to do, because silence, for those at war, can be deaf. It's in silence that fears speak louder. It's in silence that we feel the extent of our inner abandonment, and that's why we flee. From pausing, from resting, from ourselves. But there is something sacred in the act of stopping, of allowing the body to be a dwelling again, not a battlefield, of listening to what it has been trying to say for so long. Maybe you just need a minute, one whole minute, without stimulus, without distraction, without demand, just 1 minute to close your eyes and breathe. Breathe like coming home after a long time away. Breathe like recognizing that the body is not an enemy, it's a messenger, and every messenger carries something that deserves to be heard. For now, allow yourself that moment. Breathe deeply and repeat silently, I am here, I have returned. Because sometimes the greatest proof of strength is simply to remain in oneself even when everything outside seems to demand flight. To remain even when the mind races, because only then can the body at last rest. The fear of stopping, because silence reveals too much. There's a kind of haste that has no destination. It's a constant urgency, an automatic movement, an impulse to always be busy. We wake up and are already late for something we don't even know what it is. Our hands reach for our phone even before our eyes are fully open. We spend the day amidst notification tasks and shallow dialogue, as if every second of silence were too dangerous. We don't flee from loneliness, we flee from what it reveals, because when everything falls silent around us, it's our own voice that begins to echo. And sometimes it speaks of truths we've avoided for years. It's easier to seem productive than to feel useless, more comfortable to distract ourselves with superficial conversations than to face our own ghosts. Social media has become emotional anesthesia. We scroll endlessly, not out of interest, but out of fear. Fear of facing the void. Fear of finding an old, still open wound. Fear of realizing that behind the performance, we are exhausted. Relationships are initiated not out of affinity, but out of neediness. Commitments are made not out of desire, but out of fear of stopping and realizing we don't know what we want. The world applauds those who are always in motion, but those who move too much without direction end up just going in circles and calling it life. Marcus Aurelius, in his Silent Sobriety, wrote, "Turn inward, there lies the source of good." And this return is not comfortable. There's no applause, no audience, no distraction, just you and what's left of you. But it's in this encounter, naked, fragile, honest, that true healing resides. Silence isn't emptiness. It's space for what's real to finally emerge. When we stop, we begin to listen to what's behind the anger, the anxiety, the sadness, and often what's there is just a deep longing for oneself, for who you were before the fear, before the rush, before the need to prove something to everyone. Stopping isn't giving up. Stopping is restarting from a truer place. It's saying, I won't continue betraying myself just to maintain an appearance. It's choosing the temporary discomfort of consciousness over the constant anesthesia of distraction. It's accepting that truth hurt but lies corrode, and that no true peace will come as long as we keep fleeing from our own presence. Silence is not a punishment. It's an invitation to return to what truly matters, even if you don't yet know its name. Now imagine yourself sitting on a bench. There's no one else, just the sound of the wind, your breath, and that feeling you've been trying to ignore. Let it come. Look at it with compassion, because sometimes all an emotion needs is to be acknowledged to finally rest. And maybe, just maybe, you'll discover that what seemed like fear of silence was, in fact, a calling to come home, inward, to yourself. The trauma of invisible comparison, it's almost imperceptible. An internal slide, an axis shift, a feeling of always being a step behind, even when no one is looking. Comparison rarely screams. It whispers. It whispers when we see someone smiling in a photo and feel a pang in our chest. It whispers when we hear of others' achievements and silently ask ourselves, why not me? It whispers when a part of us discreetly celebrates someone's downfall, as if that somehow restores our own value. And it is in this secret territory that the trauma of comparison settled, not as explicit envy, but as a slow corrosion of one's own dignity. Comparing oneself wouldn't be so devastating if it didn't come loaded with judgment. It's not enough to recognize that the other is at a different point in their journey. We unconsciously need to decide that we are wrong, behind, small. We use others' emotional ruler to measure our own humanity, and inevitably we lose, because our ruler is made of scars, of stories no one saw, of battles we fought without witness. Measuring our trajectory with other standards is like demanding a tree to blossom at the same pace as the sea. It's unfair, it's cruel, and yet it's what we do every day, almost without realizing it. There's a subtle violence in living while trying to achieve an idealized version of oneself, the one who seems more loved, more admired, more accepted. But this version is unreal. It's a phantom molded by social expectations, algorithms, and voices that don't know the depth of what we carry. Seneca, with his disarming clarity, said, "He is not rich who possesses much, but he who needs little." And perhaps this wealth lies less in achievement and more in the quietness of not needing to prove anything, not to the world, not to anyone. Comparison becomes trauma when it makes us forget everything we've already overcome, when it obscures the silent beauty of small victories, when it convinces us that we're only worth something if we're ahead, as if life were a race. But life is not a life. Is a cycle, and everyone walks at their own pace, with the wounded feet they have, with the dreams they can still sustain, with the courage that still remain. What you carry in your heart can never be measured by external metrics. Before looking outward, give thanks for something that is alive in you today. Could be a pain you managed to name, a boundary you managed to set, thought that no longer dominates you as before. It might be little to the world, but for you, it could be everything. True abundance is this, recognizing that even without applause, you are resisting. And resisting sometimes is already a silent miracle. Comparison wants you to forget that, but now you remember, and remembering is the first step to finally being free. Anger disguised as self-control. Not all calm is peace. There are silences that are not wisdom, but containment. There are smiles that do not express joy, but effort. And there is a type of self-control that doesn't arise from maturity, but from the need not to fall apart in public. It's when we learn to swallow the scream, to disguise discomfort, to camouflage unease. And we do it so many times that we start to believe we're fine. But inside, something accumulates, something contracts, something screams, even if it has no sound. Anger doesn't disappear just because it's repressed. It changes form. Sometimes it turns into a headache. Sometimes it turns into impatience. Sometimes it turns into insomnia. And frequently, it turns into guilt, because we learn that feeling angry is wrong, that being strong means enduring everything without complaining, that maturity means keeping silent. But that's half-truth, and half-truths are dangerous, because as long as we believe that not feeling is the same as evolving, we will continue to confuse repression with control, and nothing that is truly repressed remains hidden for long. There is a corrosion that happens inside when our most intense emotions have nowhere to rest, when the fear of being misunderstood prevents us from saying, "This hurts me," when the demand to appear strong makes us silence precisely what needs to be said. Epictetus, with his sharp precision, said, "Mastering oneself is not to silence everything, it is to choose what deserves a voice." And that changes everything, because giving voice isn't exploding, it's acknowledging, it's validating, it's naming, and sometimes that alone is enough for anger to stop screaming. There's a silent practice that might seem simple, but has the power to reveal what has long been stored. Writing everything that wasn't said, everything that was swallowed, everything you'd like to say, even if you never sent. Writing like opening a window after years with the curtains closed, like allowing the soul to breathe. Anger, when listened to attentively, almost always speaks of pain, of injustice, of abandonment, of a boundary that was crossed. And listening to it with compassion is the first step to transform that fire into light, not destruction. You don't need to explode. You don't need to be silent. You need to find the middle ground, and that path is called truth. The truth of acknowledging what you feel, the truth of accepting that feeling is human, that expressing with respect is courage, that taking care of your own anger is, in fact, a profound gesture of self-love. Because when you embrace your own voice, it stops demanding attention in the form of pain, and it slowly begins to transform into presence, into clarity, into emotional dignity. What frightens us also reveals us. Not all pain is failure. Not all fear is weakness. There are experiences that break us, but light enters through the crack. There are silences that frighten us, but it is in silence that truth finally finds space. Seneca wrote that pain is a test, not of weakness, but of consciousness. And perhaps that consciousness is precisely what is missing in a world that teaches us to avoid everything that bothers. Avoid crying, avoid loneliness, avoid tired. But Stoicism invites us to the opposite, not to flee from what we feel, but to learn to be present within the storm, with firmness, with dignity, with truth. Stoic psychology doesn't ask us to be cold, it asks us to be whole. Feeling is not the problem. Reacting unconsciously, yes, suffering is part of it. But living as a slave to our own emotions is to give up the freedom that dwells in the space between stimulus and response. This space is sacred. It's where we choose who we will be, even amidst chaos. It's where silent courage flourishes. Marcus Aurelius said, "The soul becomes what it habitually contemplates." And this forces us to ask, what have we been contemplating? What have we been feeding with our attention? What stories do we repeat until they become identity? There is something profoundly transformative in looking inward with courage, in contemplating one's own pain, not as an enemy, but as a guide. Because pain knows the way back to what is essential. It shows us what no longer serves, what needs to be healed, what demands new boundary. It points to what was ignored but never forgotten. And when we decide to listen to it, not with despair, but with humility, it stops screaming and begins to teach, begins to reveal, begins to rebuild. You don't need to be ready. You don't need to have answers. You just need to be willing to stop running from yourself, because every time you contemplate your own pain with presence, you're saying, I care about myself. And that is already a silent but definitive revolution. The soul becomes what it habitually contemplates. So contemplate the truth. Contemplate what is real. Contemplate, even if it hurt, because what frightens you also reveals you. And what reveals you, if embraced with patience, can heal you, with firmness, without haste, with truth. If your pain could speak now, what would it ask you to rebuild? Not out of obligation, but out of dignity, out of wholeness, out of love. The answer doesn't have to come today, but the silence born from that question might already be the beginning.